Okay, so the purpose of this video here is we're trying to pull over the last little bits about our discussion about judging art. And so this comes at the tail end. So you really should put this with your previous notes, those of you who took notes. All right. So our learning outcomes, what I want you to be able to do after you finish this is really connect this discussion to the previous ideas about aesthetics. Remember, we talked about Immanuel Kant. We talked about some cultural stuff. We talked about some sense perception stuff. And then I also would like you to develop some of your own criteria for judging art. Really to try to help you organize your ideas from the beginning so that when you are writing your summative or maybe when you are working on your final TOK essay, you have some of your ideas located in the same place. So as we continue, I would really like you to stop and take some notes and just kind of organize your thoughts. Really, it's a good idea for you to do this, right? So, how are the artistic tastes similar or different from culture to culture? We've watched a couple of videos. You yourself come from a number of different cultures, and so and you are probably something we call the third culture kid, someone who is of one culture, has grown up in multiple cultures, and kind of pause the video and stop and take a note about this because this could help you later on in discussing your essays. How are artistic tastes similar or different from culture to culture? Using specific examples that you know, go ahead and take some notes. In continuing, is it a matter of perspective in that some are more inclined to see similarities between things while others are more inclined to see the differences? Again, pause, take some notes. So, generally, we can conclude that there are universal elements in all cultures, right? Possibly because of things like sense perception. We looked at various things about what's beautiful. We talked about colors that people prefer. We talked about landscapes and stuff like this. However, it's really important to note cultural differences, right? We've spoken about the European opera versus Chinese opera. Why are they both opera, even though they sound completely different? How is it that they're both very artistic and people claim they're beautiful and things like this? And then, of course, to someone who doesn't know, there are really like vast similarities. When you look at baseball and when you look at cricket, they look very, very similar, but the games couldn't be any more different. The similarities are really just quite superficial. So, and again, how does this apply to art? How can you conceive of art as having universality if such differences exist? What I would recommend that you do is actually just take a bit of a stop and pause and go open another YouTube page and take a quick look at Chinese opera and then take a quick look at European opera. Which one do you like? Why? Why not? Look at these two pictures. They're both of the same thing. Why are there differences? Which one appeals to you more? Why do you think they appeal to you more? Can we see the similarities between them? What are the differences between them? Why do those differences exist? Pause, reflect, make yourself a little note. So here we just take a sort of like concluding look in a way at this judging of art, right? And so if we say everything is art and it kind of is based on, I don't know, the intentions of the artist or the emotional connection and stuff, then does that strip the meaning away from the word art? how do we define it? How do things become part of art, right? And so Marcel Duchamp challenged what art was. And so in 1917, he placed this urinal. He changed the way that its orientation, and he places it in a museum setting. And so he was trying to push the envelope and kind of challenge what we perceive as art. And it brings into the ideas of the context again. Now, I myself, having studied art history and basically gone through the educational system, would insist that this is art. Although I know it's art because that is what my art history professors, who were also art critics and part of the formal art world, instructed me. I myself look at it and I think, it's a urinal, okay. Um, and in some ways, it's still a bit of a challenge, right? The other thing that I find interesting here is we talk about context, we talk about the intentions of the artist. Here, Marcel Duchamp is in a way saying that it's not the visual aspects that counts, or as historians think, that he's talking about the conceptual aspects of it. Now, the other thing that I find really interesting, if you go back and think about to some of the stuff that we've spoken about in terms of gender and culture and all of this stuff, we all know Marcel Duchamp. We all know that he signed it R. Mutt, Richard Mutt, and he put it in a gallery. But there's also the possibility that it wasn't him at all, that this has meaning because it's Marcel Duchamp and he was an artist and he himself took it on. But in 1917, he said that it was a female friend of his. So does it lose its status as art, or because of the woman behind it? Or does it become art because it's a man who put it in that context? And if we're talking about the intentions of the artist isn't Duchamp, or maybe he is, for basically stealing somebody else's work and gaining fame and notoriety from it. I don't know. You consider. All right. So instead, we might suggest that everything can be looked at from an aesthetic point of view. So go back and consider some of the stuff that we considered for aesthetics. Pause the video and see whether or not you can even agree with this, right? And then something to consider is that almost like the interest level of it, right? If something is art, if it lasts beyond the surface. So think about it like something like a Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Every time you listen to it, every recording of it, something is different. There's room for interpretation. There's room for it to there's room for you to find something else in it. There are all of these different layers and relationships between various elements of the piece, right? So this idea that it's inexhaustible, that there's constantly something new from it. And so maybe the more of that there is, then maybe the more art it is, the more it embodies whatever makes it art. And so when we talked about sense perception, we considered this, right? This idea of of something not being exhausted. So I would recommend you take a pause, you go back and you look at that. Or if nothing else, run a quick search on Google to try to see if you can find that information. Gives you another something that you can put in there in terms of your analyses. And sort of consider this. We looked at some Damien Hirst before. Why is this art? Pause. Really, why is this art? Apply this to all of this other stuff that we've talked about in terms of judging art. Take a moment and judge this piece. Pros, cons, judge this piece. Which brings us to criteria for judging art. What I'd really like you to do is for you to take a few minutes, open a new document, or take out a sheet of paper, title it Criteria for Judging Art, and take a few minutes to actually list down what your criteria are. And for each one, consider why you think this is important, and and then also, as you do that, as you consider why it's important, note what is supporting this idea, right? I think art should be should be beautiful. Why? Consider your culture, consider your education. What you consider to be art will be different from someone like me who has taken art classes and art history classes, and I've been taught a different way. Consider your culture, and then please, 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 please consider the stuff we've discussed in the past few lessons. Once you've done this, take about 10-20 minutes to do this. Save this document and put it to the side. Consider this document like a collation of all of the stuff that we've talked about, so that when you are writing your essay, you have something to refer back to, specifically to gather your information. So once you are doing that exploring your question, and you've listed some stuff down, some avenues of exploration, then you pick this up and start pulling some ideas out. You need to make sure you do this so that you have resources for you to actually be able to do your work well. All right, and to conclude, as my history people know, I like to leave with a little bit of something, something at the end. So, if you're French, British, or Russian, please do not be offended. But this will help illustrate some TOK stuff. Sort of, maybe. All right, here it goes. A Briton, a Frenchman, and a Russian are viewing a painting of Adam and Eve frolicking in the Garden of Eden. Look at their reserve, their calm, muses the Brit. They must be British. Nonsense, the Frenchman disagrees. They're naked and so beautiful. Clearly, they are French. No way! They have no clothes and no shelter, the Russian points out. They have only an apple to eat, and they are being told they live in paradise. Obviously, they are Russian. So that also had a bit of a history bit in it as well. Enjoy.